All right. As the kids come forward, let me just say let me first of all just say good morning. Yeah, it's a joy to worship with you all here on Sunday morning, and it's so good for our souls to be able to do this. Not only because we're meeting God here, but we're also worshiping with each other here, and it's an awesome thing. And I just love watching our praise band up here because if you'll notice, friends, they don't perform. They're up here. They're our lead worshipers, and they're worshiping God. And they help us to do that as well at a certain level, at a high level. And that just empowers us to worship God. And this is a really good, safe space to do that in. Now, my car actually isn't when I'm driving. Because if I'm listening to a praise song, I just can't just lose myself in the midst of that. I just can't just kind of close my eyes and just picture, just me and God up there in heaven with me praising Him. Because if I do that, I'll end up in a car crash, right? And I don't want to hurt anybody. But here, I can take my hand off the wheel. See? Here, I can just relax and just let go and worship. So that's another reason to come, and be with us and worship Sunday in and Sunday out and through the week as well, is because we can do it. This is a very, very safe spot. Well, I've been having a little bit of trouble with my prompter this morning, so we'll kind of work on that maybe sometime in the next week. But if you will, Cheryl, thank you for doing that. I appreciate that. So this is a sign that I saw when I was in Cuba back in January, and as you all know, I've told you before, I was on that Cuban trip, that mission trip with Bob Beckwith, who is the leader of the Methodist ministry over there, the campus ministry, and I was also with other pastors from North Georgia. We went to the eastern side of Cuba, and one of the towns that we visited was Antilla, which is a really beautiful seaside town. The church was so gracious. They cooked a lunch for us that we had. It was fabulous. And after we got done, the pastor wanted to go and just walk off some of the calories. So that was a good idea. So we started walking through town, literally, just kind of going up and down the hills. And it's kind of a hilly city. And so as we were doing so, we came up by this one property. And there was a small house behind this chain link fence that's there. And they had a lot of signs up. And so I was kind of curious. This one sign in particular that you're looking at in the middle really grabbed my attention. And so I was asking the pastor, what it meant. And I couldn't remember. Ay perro muerde la duena también. Grr. And so I was wondering, what exactly is that? And the pastor said, well, what that sign says is this. There's a dog here that bites, and the owner does too. Yeah. So none of us offered to jump over the fence at that point. That's all right. Okay, good. If you can go to the black screen next and just position it there. Thank you. All right, friends. Well, Psalm 142 is kind of what we're drilling down on today. And let me just say that as I read this psalm this week, and as I was praying through it, it was apparent to me that David, who wrote this psalm, David felt a lot like Whale 52. Now, David was at the point of his life here where he had experienced, and keep your eyes open to 142 because we're going to take this, taking it like a verse at a time. David was at a place where he had experienced the highest of highs in his young life. He had been anointed as the king, the future king for Israel, by probably the most famous prophet in all of the country, by Samuel. So that was a pretty major thing. Afterwards, David's the same guy who knocked that giant, the 9-foot giant that we call Goliath, off of his feet and then took his head off with his own sword. David also, following that, won many battles. He became really the greatest military general of Israel, and battle after battle after battle, and God's favor was upon his life, and so he was winning all of these great military campaigns, and he was on a roll. Things were going great for him, but then King Saul became insanely jealous of the attention that David was getting. And he didn't like that because Saul wanted the attention for himself. He didn't want people singing about David. He wanted the country people to be singing about himself. What a great king that he was. And so he then sent basically his hit squad after David. So David, attempt after attempt was made on his life. He had no choice at this point but to run. So he took off. He fled. He was out in just the countryside, the wilderness, for a long time. He ended up in this cave of Adullam, is where he finally wrote this Psalm 142 from. And so when you read the Psalm, what you realize is that in this spot, in this space, David is all isolated. I just picture this damp, cold, dark, forgotten cave. And there David is. He didn't have any of his military soldiers with him. Didn't have his parents there or his brothers there. He was all alone, scared, worried. And in that loneliness, he was being tormented. And so I really feel like David was at a Whale 52 spot. Now, Whale 52, if you'll flip up the next picture, please. Thank you, Cheryl. And just leave that there. So 52 hertz whale, that's what you see there. So let me tell you about this whale. This is a really unusual whale, Whale 52, in that he was first located back in 1989 when researchers picked up on the frequency of his call, because he's very unusual in that when the whales will make noise in the ocean, sometimes they're singing, sometimes they're calling out to other whales. Well, they'll do so on certain frequency levels. Well, Whale 52 does it at a level of 52. That's why he gets the name 52 hertz. Now, most whales are at a frequency that's much lower than that. They may be in the teens or they may be in the 20s. So 52 is just like at a level that the other whales are not at. Now, there's a researcher, one professor at least, who thinks that other whales can hear his voice, can hear the frequency that he's on, but most of the people that I was reading about, the researchers, the biologists, they believe that even if other whales can hear him talking at this level of 52 hertz, which is far higher than their own level, that they can't understand what he's saying. In other words, it's kind of like they're talking English and he's talking Serbian or Russian or Brazilian, Portuguese. They can't really understand it. They might be able to hear him, but they can't understand what he's saying. And so that's why he's gotten the tag of, and people call him, in fact, there's a movie about him, next screen please, being the loneliest whale in the sea. Now just imagine being this whale. If you're out there, and let's just say, oh, this is exactly right, that nobody understands him. Imagine being that whale and you're calling out for a buddy. You're calling out for a friend, a girlfriend to go on a shopping trip with you, or a guy to go on a hunting trip, with you. Hey, let's go find, some killer whales or some dolphins or something to eat, And nobody knows what you're saying. You're out there alone in the ocean, week after week, month after month. You're calling out, but nobody understands a thing that you're saying. Loneliest whale in the world. Well, David probably felt like the loneliest person in the world. There was nobody there in that cave to just hear him talk about how afraid he was of being hunted down like an animal by this king that he was supporting and really giving his life for, King Saul. And what was he getting in return? Nothing but murderous threats being breathed at him. So there he was alone in that cave. But he actually wasn't alone, was he? Because we see here in Psalm 142, notice this. I cry aloud. Now, God is directing us to do something very important, because some of you right now may be Whale 52. You may be in a spot where you just feel like nobody gets it. Nobody really understands just how hard it is for you, and you feel like you're collapsing. You may be there right now. If you're not there now, if you haven't been there recently, newsflash, you're going to be there at another time. You will, friends. We're all, probably during several seasons of our life, we're all Whale 52. And so what God wants us to do is pick up on what David was doing here. He says, I cry aloud to the Lord. I plead aloud to the Lord for mercy. So when you're in that spot, what the Lord would have you do, and by the way, even if you're not at the whale or the level of Whale 52 in terms of desperation, in terms of loneliness, we all still go through situations just on a day-to-day basis of stuff that we carry. And so what God is telling us to do here is, hey, listen, get in a spot where you can come before me and just let it all out. Where you can cry, where you can yell, where you can just really bare your soul to me. And that's what David's doing. See, I want to encourage you, go to a place where maybe you can't be heard. Go to the forest. Go out in the woods. Go out on a lake in a canoe where nobody else can hear you. And just yell out to the top of your lungs. Now, if you're there in the woods and you're yelling out pretty loud and the pine trees are shaking, the groundhogs might hear you and the squirrels might hear you, but you need to understand, that's fine if they do, but they're not the audience that you're trying to reach. What do when you're crying? You cry aloud to who? To the Lord. Right? Look at what David says here. Verse 1, I cry aloud to the Lord, not to the groundhog, not to the blue jay. I plead aloud to who? The Lord. Yeah, that's right. Right there in the second sentence. I plead aloud to the Lord. And so David is crying out to God. God is the one who is inviting us. Give it to me, please. Speak to me. Talk to me what's going on in your soul, not for his information, but for our consolation. That's what he's drawing us into. Now look at verse 2 here. Now I got to tell you, I was a little thrown off by this week, because when I was reading about how David, he says, I pour out my complaint before him. I thought, man, David, God didn't put you in that spot. King Saul did. God's not trying to hunt you down to kill you. I pour out my complaint to him. It's almost like, you envision David just complaining. Oh, God, here you go again. You put me between a rock and a hard place. Well, you know what that actually means in Hebrew? I pour out my complaint. It literally means I pour out my troubled thoughts. See, that's different from complaint. Complaint is right. I mean, literally that's what it means. But here's what it actually means beyond the words. My troubled thoughts, the things that are sloshing around in your soul that are there, David is saying, God, I just release this now into your hands. I just get this stuff off of my chest and onto you, God. These troubled thoughts. Now, here's why it's so important to do this. When our souls are all stirred up and they're hurting and they're aching, it's very much like a gallon of spoiled milk that's inside of us. What happens if you've got a spoiled milk that's there in your house? What happens if you leave it there day after day after day? It's just going to get nastier, right? Yeah. And if you drink it, it'll make you sick. So if the stuff that's inside of you is just sloshing around, that's there, because you feel like nobody understands you. You feel like you're all alone. You feel like nobody cares. Nobody gives a flip whether you live or you die. And it's in there. The longer it stays, the sicker you're going to become. It will have an effect on you. It'll have an effect sometimes on your physical body. Sometimes it'll just be on your attitudes. And everybody around you will see it. You may be oblivious to it, but they will read through it very, very clearly. Now, I want you to notice something here as well. We're in this kind of location. You can turn it to black now, Cheryl. Thank you. When you're in this location, when you're Whale 52, watch it because your mind will play tricks on you. It will cause you to believe things about yourself and your situation that actually aren't true. Look here at David. Case in point, verse 4. David says, look around, I look around and I see, no one stands up for me. Meaning like no one's coming to my defense. There is no refuge for me. There's no place in all of Israel that I can hide. And here's one that really grabs me. No one cares about me. That actually was not true. See, David his parents were still alive at this point. We know that. So his mom and dad, do you think they cared about David? Yeah, they loved David, of course. They wanted to see their son. Yeah, they cared about him. His wife cared about him. The people that he led in battle, the soldiers, cared about him. His family, his brothers, cared about him. But see, he felt that way, even though it wasn't true. So watch it, friends. When you're swimming around in the ocean as Whale 52 and you feel like you're all by yourself, you're actually not all by yourself. You may feel like nobody cares if I live or die. Nobody gives a flip. I'm a horrible person. I'm a terrible Christian. Oh, woe is me. Okay, these are not accurate thoughts, so just be aware of that. Let what God sees about you define you, not what you feel and your soul is crying out. Okay, really, really important to understand that. Now, look at verse 3. Although my spirit is weak within me, you, God, see, he's talking to God here, right? You know my way. What this means is, I like the good or God's Word translation. It says, when I begin to lose hope, this is what it means, although my spirit is weak within me, you know my way. It's actually saying when I begin to lose hope, you already know, God, what I'm experiencing. Now this is nice, because as Whale 52, when you feel all alone and you feel like nobody gets it, guess what? Jesus gets it. Jesus understands. And when your mind and your heart cling to that reality, you know what happens? All of a sudden you feel understood. You feel like, okay, he's on the same 52 hertz wavelength that I'm on. Jesus understands. And y'all, that's the beginning of freedom. That's the beginning of healing. When you know that, okay, God gets it. Man, that just makes you feel so much better. Verse 5, David continues, he says, I cry to you, Lord. I say, you're my shelter, my portion in the land of the living. You're my shelter. So what David is saying here is, God, you're my protector. You're the one who will protect my life. You're the one who defines how long I'll live on earth. Not King Saul. You have the final word. Not this guy who's out to murder me. You're my protector and my portion in the land of the living. We don't use that word a lot about my portion. What David is saying here is that, God, you are all I want in this life. Amen. Isn't that beautiful? Because he's taken that spoiled milk, Now, I want you to think about this. I want you to try this today, okay? This is your assignment for today. Your minister is giving you homework, okay? Take a gallon of milk, from your refrigerator, a full gallon, and just sit there and just hold it for 2 minutes. Okay? Just hold it. It's not that easy, okay? Well, what's going to happen? It's going to get heavy, right? But if you take that milk, and let's imagine like with spoiled milk, rotten milk inside of our souls, David took it and he poured it out, right? What happens when you pour it all out? It may get messy out there in the woods. It may get messy in the canoe with you crying and yelling out, to the Lord. But once it's all empty, that jug is a whole lot lighter, isn't it? And so it is with our souls when we pour out our troubled thoughts to God. Then all of a sudden we're a lot lighter and we can handle these circumstances that now don't feel so intimidating. You are all I want in this life. And by the way, when you pour that junk out, you and I have space in our hearts to speak on the frequency of a love language that God is always communicating to us in. Yeah. And that's healing. Last verse. Free me, David is saying, free me from my prison, meaning, God, get me out of this cave, and when you do, free me out of my prison so that I can praise your name. So, God, when you get me out of this cave, you know what's going to happen, God? I'm going to turn it loose in public. I'm going to get out in the middle of the Kroger parking lot, and I'm just going to shout out, Jesus, how great you are. God, I'm going to tell you in front of everybody who hears, just how wonderful you are and how full of mercy that you are, God. I'm going to let everyone know, including where I work, God. I'm not going to hold back. Then, yeah, that's right. And friends, we shall too, all right? And so God is saying, hey, listen, step into this because it's good. Now, the next one here, the righteous, let me finish with this one. The righteous will gather around me. Now, 3-4 weeks ago, when I was up in Kentucky at the Asbury Outpouring, I was at Asbury University, where they don't know, they're still trying to figure out what to call it, an awakening, a revival, whatever. Anyway, it's a great move of God. I was up there, and I was in Hughes Auditorium, which is the chapel on Asbury University's campus. So when I was in the chapel, I heard this testimony that was given. Somebody got up and shared about what a lady had said 2 weeks earlier, and this experience in the midst of a chapel service. They said that this student got up on stage, and she said that 2 weeks earlier, she came really close to committing suicide. And she looked at the crowd and she says, sometimes I feel like I'm invisible. Like nobody sees me. Like nobody cares. I feel alone. No one sees me. 7 students came up, female students came up to the stage. She stepped off, and for the next hour, they showed her the heart of Jesus. They listened to her. They listened to her problems. They listened to her heart. They were a safe spot for her to cry in. An hour later, she came out of that group and she had a smile on her face. Jesus had met her in her cave. Jesus had sent 7 other ladies to come and be with her. The righteous will gather around me. Jesus sent people, Christians, to her aid in that moment to gather around her. And in that spot, Jesus walked with her with those women out of her cave, bringing her out. Friends, last thing, Jesus came out of his cave on the day of resurrection. Now, is that a surprise to you all? Okay. He did do that, right? Okay, all right, that's right, because we're Easter people. We better believe that he did that. Yes, he came out of his grave on Easter, on the day of resurrection. And because he did that, he knows how to walk with you out of your cave. Yeah. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and God's young people said, Amen.